The little boy was standing beside the bakery counter, holding a tiny blue birthday candle in his fist, when his mother quietly pushed the cake box back toward the cashier. She looked at the cake one last time, swallowed hard, and whispered that she was sorry, but she couldn't afford it. Her son didn't cry. That somehow made it worse. He simply looked down at the floor and said, "It's okay, Mom. We can have a birthday without a cake." Across the bakery, a single father named Matthew Carter heard every word. And what he did next would change not only that little boy's birthday, but the lives of 3 strangers forever. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance when life feels impossible, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest memory someone carries for the rest of their life. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, and Matthew had brought his 8-year-old son, Caleb, to the Golden Oak Patisserie to pick up a birthday cake. Caleb's 10th birthday was the following morning, and Matthew had promised him a chocolate cake with strawberry filling, extra frosting, and a ridiculous amount of sprinkles. Caleb had been talking about it all week. For a few hours, Matthew wanted his son to forget about the difficulties waiting for them at home. Matthew had been raising Caleb alone for almost 6 years. His wife, Rachel, had died unexpectedly when Caleb was only 4. Since then, Matthew had learned how to braid hair badly enough to make Caleb laugh, how to cook 3 different dinners that somehow always tasted the same, and how to pretend everything was going to be okay even when he wasn't sure it would be. He worked long hours as a maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex. The pay was enough to keep food on the table and the lights on, but there wasn't much left afterward. His old truck needed repairs. The rent had recently increased. Caleb needed new school shoes. Matthew had quietly postponed replacing his own winter coat for 2 years because there was always something more important. Still, he had saved a little money for Caleb's birthday. As Matthew stood near the counter, he noticed a woman standing several feet away with her young son. She looked exhausted. Her name, as Matthew would later learn, was Grace Bennett. Grace was probably in her mid-30s. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, and her brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. Her son, a little boy named Noah, was perhaps 7 years old. He wore a blue hoodie and held a small paper crown from the bakery's children's display. Noah had been staring at a cake in the glass case. It was nothing extravagant. A small vanilla cake with blue icing and a few yellow stars. But to Noah, it looked like treasure. Grace had asked the cashier how much it cost. When the cashier told her, Grace reached into her purse and counted her money twice. Matthew noticed the change in her face. She had enough for the cake, but not enough for the cake and everything else she needed. Grace quietly apologized and said she would have to cancel the order. The cashier, trying to be polite, told her it was completely fine. Noah looked at his mother and forced a smile. "Maybe next year," he said. Grace's eyes immediately filled with tears, but she turned her face away so her son wouldn't see. Matthew felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that look. He had worn it himself many times. It was the look of a parent trying to hide fear from a child. Matthew glanced at Caleb, who was studying a display of chocolate cupcakes. Then he looked back at Noah. For a moment, he remembered Caleb at 4 years old, standing beside Rachel's hospital bed and asking why Mommy was sleeping so much. Matthew had promised himself that if he ever had the chance to make a child's life a little lighter, he wouldn't walk away. He stepped toward the counter. He told the cashier that he wanted to pay for Grace's cake. Grace immediately turned around and shook her head. She said she couldn't accept charity. Matthew smiled gently and explained that it wasn't charity. It was simply one parent helping another parent. Grace still refused. She said she had made mistakes and gotten behind on bills, and she didn't want anyone feeling sorry for her. Matthew looked at Noah and then back at Grace. He told her that he wasn't feeling sorry for her. He was simply remembering how difficult it could be when you loved your child more than anything, but couldn't give them what they wanted. Grace went silent. Matthew asked the cashier to keep the original cake order exactly as it was. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He asked if there was a larger chocolate cake available. Grace immediately told him that wasn't necessary. Matthew explained that it was for Caleb's birthday, but then he looked at Noah and said that maybe the boys could share a birthday celebration. Caleb had overheard everything. He walked over with a cupcake in his hand and told Noah that chocolate cake was better than vanilla anyway. Noah smiled for the first time. That tiny smile was enough. But Matthew wasn't finished. He told Grace that he had a small birthday tradition. Every year, he let Caleb choose one extra person to invite to his birthday table. This year, Caleb could choose Noah. Caleb looked at his father and nodded. Grace tried to protest again, but her voice broke. She finally whispered that she didn't know what to say. Matthew simply told her she didn't need to say anything. The bakery owner, Hannah Miller, had been watching from behind the counter. She quietly offered to add a dozen cupcakes to the order. Another customer, an elderly man named Robert, heard what was happening and offered a small bag of balloons he had purchased for his granddaughter but no longer needed. Within minutes, something beautiful was happening. A cake became two cakes. A lonely birthday became a shared celebration. And one mother's embarrassment slowly turned into something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But Matthew didn't know the full story behind Grace's tears. He only knew that she was struggling. Later that afternoon, Matthew helped carry the boxes to the parking lot. Grace stood beside him, still overwhelmed. She finally told him that Noah's father had left almost a year earlier. He had promised to send money for their son's birthday, but the money never came. Grace had recently lost her job at a medical billing company after taking too many days off when Noah was sick. She had applied everywhere. She had been rejected again and again. The previous night, she had counted the money in her wallet and realized she couldn't afford both groceries and Noah's birthday cake. She had planned to tell him that birthdays weren't really about cake, but watching him pretend not to care had broken her heart. Matthew listened without interrupting. Then he told her something about himself. He explained that after Rachel died, there had been a night when Caleb asked for a glass of milk, and Matthew opened the refrigerator and realized there was barely anything inside. He had sat on the kitchen floor after Caleb went to bed and cried because he felt like he was failing his son. He told Grace that being a good parent didn't mean being able to give your child everything. Sometimes it meant staying. Sometimes it meant trying again. And sometimes it meant letting someone help you. Grace looked at him with tears streaming down her face. She said she had forgotten what it felt like for someone to help without expecting something in return. Matthew told her that she could repay him someday by doing the same thing for someone else. That evening, Grace brought Noah to Matthew's small house. It wasn't fancy. The living room had an old couch, a second-hand television, and birthday decorations Matthew had bought from a discount store. But Caleb had transformed the place. He had taped balloons to the walls. He had made a handmade birthday banner. And on the kitchen table sat the giant chocolate cake. Noah stopped at the doorway. His eyes widened. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then he whispered, "Is this really for me?" Caleb smiled and told him it was for both of them. The boys spent the evening running around the house, laughing, playing board games, and arguing over who got the biggest slice of cake. Grace sat quietly at the kitchen table, watching them. Matthew noticed she wasn't eating. He placed a plate in front of her. She said she wasn't hungry. Matthew told her that parents deserved cake too. She laughed through her tears. Later, when the candles were lit, Caleb and Noah stood together in front of the cake. Matthew lowered the lights. Everyone began singing. Noah looked at the flames. He closed his eyes. And instead of making a wish immediately, he looked at his mother. Grace nodded through tears. Noah finally whispered his wish. Nobody heard it. But Matthew had a feeling it wasn't about toys. It wasn't about money. It was probably something every child secretly wishes for. To know that tomorrow will be okay. After the boys blew out the candles, Noah ran toward Grace and hugged her tightly. She held him like she was afraid he might disappear. Matthew watched from across the room, and for the first time in years, he felt Rachel's absence a little less painfully. Because kindness had a strange way of bringing people together. But the story didn't end that night. 3 weeks later, Matthew received a phone call from Grace. She sounded different. Hopeful. She had found a new job. Hannah, the bakery owner, had heard about Grace's experience and had offered her a position helping with bookkeeping and customer orders. Grace had also started selling homemade decorations online. Things weren't suddenly perfect. She still had bills. She still had difficult days. But she had work. She had a plan. And most importantly, she had stopped believing that asking for help made her weak. Then something unexpected happened. A few months later, Matthew's old truck finally broke down. He was standing outside the apartment complex one rainy morning, staring at the dead engine, wondering how he was going to pay for repairs. His phone rang. It was Grace. She told him she had heard what happened. Matthew laughed and said he would figure it out. Grace reminded him of something he had told her months earlier. Sometimes you had to let someone help you. Matthew became quiet. The next day, Grace arrived with Noah and 2 other people from the bakery. They had organized a small fundraiser. Customers had contributed. Hannah had donated bakery proceeds from an entire Saturday. Robert had even brought a handwritten envelope. Matthew didn't know what to say. He stood beside his broken truck with tears in his eyes. Grace told him that he had once given her son a birthday he would never forget. Now it was her turn to give something back. Matthew hugged her, and in that moment, he realized something. He had thought that afternoon in the bakery was about buying a cake. It wasn't. It was about reminding someone that they mattered. And somehow, that small act had traveled from one heart to another until it came back to him when he needed it most. Years later, Noah would still talk about the birthday when a stranger became family. Caleb would remember that day as the moment his father taught him one of life's most important lessons. And Grace would never forget the man who saw her trying to cancel a birthday cake and chose not to look away. Because sometimes a person doesn't need someone to rescue them. Sometimes they just need someone to stand beside them long enough to remember that they can rescue themselves. And sometimes, the most powerful gift you can give another person isn't money. It's dignity. It's hope. It's the simple message that says, you don't have to face this moment alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little hope today. And before we end, I want you to do something special. Comment, "Kindness comes back," if you believe that one small act of kindness can change someone's life. Because Matthew thought he was simply buying a birthday cake for a child he didn't know. He never imagined that one cake would create a friendship, restore a mother's hope, teach 2 boys the meaning of compassion, and eventually return to him when his own life became difficult. That is the beautiful thing about kindness. You may never know how far it travels. You may never see every life it touches. But somewhere, someday, when someone needs hope the most, the kindness you gave might become the reason they believe tomorrow can be better. And sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to walk away.